The unraveling seems to be by design, and even though it seems like everything is unraveling rather quickly now, we did not arrive in our frayed state in just 2 years, or even 6 years, or 10. And even though previous generations will argue that they survived greater challenges than what is happening to this country now, the reality is that all the threads are being pulled now. And while some holes may have been punched in the fabric in the past, the pillars underpinning our way of life remained intact. Today, as each thread is being pulled, each pulled thread also represents a hairline crack in one of the pillars. And while we see no holes punched that are bigger than holes we have repaired in the past, the integrity of the pillars holding up the great American experiment is dubious. And the threads are so loose that even though we may still look like the same country, one last tug could leave the threads in a pile on the table and reduce the structure's facade to mere rubble. It is quite a bit like the Miami footbridge collapse in 2018. Construction workers were tightening internal cables when the bridge, designed to connect Florida International University to Sweetwater, a community where about 4,000 students live, collapsed, killing 6. While this footbridge was designed as a suspension bridge, thus the cables need to have just the right tension placed on them, have the pillars holding up the crossbeam that is American society been placed under increased tension as of late? Chief NTSB investigator on the scene of the Miami bridge collapse, Robert Aceta, acknowledged, quote, "It's not uncommon in other bridge structures to put members under tension to strengthen them," end quote. Sometimes the tension is necessary to strengthen the structure. As we test the foundations, the bases, the capitals, we either discover how strong the structure is or where the weaknesses lie. And we can then repair or strengthen the construction of the pillars to better support the lintel. When our new country took its first steps, it faced many tests of its foundations and bases. And I think there are many places within the country's past where the society was confronted with its own hypocrisy, and it learned and it grew, and those tensions actually strengthened the country. And the weaknesses in our society were recognized as well. Unfortunately, I think some of those weaknesses were not reinforced, not repaired, but instead they were ignored or maybe even exploited. Ralph Verastro, specialty structural engineer for over 500 bridges across the United States, explained, quote, "The bridge section that collapsed was designed to hold its own weight until the entire span is assembled into place," end quote. My argument is not to analogize society as a suspension bridge under tension support, but the fabric was woven out of sturdy threads and by master craftsmen on a superior loom, and the civilization lintel was placed on 2 very sturdy pillars. In this way, American society did support itself, at least for a long while. The American society took its ability to support itself for granted, though, I think. After construction, the Miami footbridge was supposed to be supported by cables attached to an off-center tower above it. But while the construction was underway, it was, quote, "unclear what builders had been using as temporary supports," end quote. This can be likened to the idea that we just took our civilization for granted. We took our liberties, our freedom, our way of life, the construction of American society for granted. As the country prospered, fixing the moral mistakes discovered along the way, there was never a need to closely examine what may be affecting the support structure. Ming Wang, professor of civil and environmental engineering at Northeastern University in Boston, argued that the stress test process for tension-supported bridges is, quote, "very, very dangerous." And adding additional support in the middle of the bridge would have helped to prevent abrupt failure because without it, quote, "if one element fails, everything fails," end quote. As we delve into what has caused the unraveling of the fabric of this country, we might be asking ourselves, what additional supports could we have provided for our societal lintel? Because as we shall see, if one of the 2 pillars starts crumbling, the entire lintel will ultimately crash and crumble. and our society will be merely a heap of rubble. It is also interesting to note that though the bridge collapsed on March 15th, 2018, on February 24th, 2018, a distinct cracking was heard, and a crack was observed and documented. I believe that distinct cracking, in reference to our two civilizational pillars, has been heard and documented. I believe it occurred in 2020, the year of the country's stress test. However, quote, the bridge span already had extensive concrete cracking that had progressed significantly in the several days before this work was performed. And these cracks were a clear indication that the structure's intended load-resisting mechanisms were failing, end quote. By the time the distinct cracking was heard and documented in 2020, however, there was already extensive cracking throughout our two societal pillars. Cracking that had progressed significantly and had been ignored by an apathetic citizenry and dismissed as insignificant by those with power to influence the outcome. The construction workers in Miami were attempting to retension the bridge on March 10th, after which the cracking immediately worsened and continued to worsen over the next 5 days, leading up to the collapse on March 15th. It appears as though all attempts to fix the issues, now too evident to ignore, actually serve to worsen the integrity of the pillars, not to strengthen the overall structure as promised by those with power to influence the outcome. This is in parallel with what I believe happened within American society between March 2020 and today. All attempted repairs are instead causing more damage to society. And it was during another attempt at retensioning that ultimate failure occurred. The NTS being concluded, quote, because nobody took action despite clear signs of structural distress, the collapse killed 6 people and injured 10, end quote. Both political sides, I'm talking about American society right now, are scrambling to find a solution to what they have identified as the problem in this country. But their solutions, on both sides, appear to simply be hastening the ultimate failure of the great American experiment. Bridge engineer Ralph Verastro originally posited, quote, I believe it will be found that it will not be just one thing that happened. It almost never is, end quote. There is never just one thing that causes the demise of a civilization or a particular society either. And in the case of the great American experiment, it can be traced to failure after failure, dismissal after dismissal, apathy, disinterest, lack of appreciation or undervaluing what we had, false beliefs, and attitudes of entitlement. It is also interesting to note that immediately after the Miami footbridge collapse, there was quite a bit of speculation why the roadway beneath the bridge was allowed to remain open during construction. If no one had been on the street below, no one would have been killed or injured. This is a place in the analogy where conspiracy theorists start commenting that those with power to influence the outcome must have planned on killing at least a few of those still using the highway, unaware of the danger they were truly in. As Americans, we rely on authorities to point out the dangers in the roadway ahead. We see road closure signs, flashing warnings, cones up to close off lanes. But not only do too many Americans ignore those warnings and run over the cones and drive on closed off lanes, but it appears that most of the people we Americans rely on for those warnings either chose not to produce the warnings or did not themselves see the need nor the cracks in the pillars. Another similar incident to that of the 2018 Miami footbridge collapse that grabbed national attention was the condo collapse in Surfside, Florida, where a report went unheeded and the sudden collapse did not kill just 6, but 98, while reducing the homes and valuables of 242 individuals to a pile of rubble and debris. Was it the same construction company? No. Was it the same inspection group? No. The reality is, it does not matter which side one is on. We have all failed each other. Those in power have failed the American citizen. Influencers have failed their followers. Americans have failed one another. And even though we were warned about what could happen when obvious structural issues go unaddressed, as we were in the Miami footbridge incident, we were not paying enough attention to our own house, as in the Surfside condo incident, to know well enough to not just shout out the danger, but to do something about it, like finding new accommodations for all those housed in the doomed condominium. Writing this book, for me, was my attempt to shout out the danger to all the residents in the doomed condo. I had such an urgency to get this message out, and I just feel as though not enough people are listening. It's not about selling the book, really. It's about getting my message out, because just like most of the residents of the condo had no idea there was something to worry about, I feel as though most Americans have no idea what kind of danger we have placed ourselves in. We have no idea what that ominous crack of 2020 really portends for the future. And because Americans can still drive under the bridge and go home to the condo each night, oblivious to the danger, not only do they have no urgency to escape or avoid the danger, I think the ultimate collapse will take them with it, or at least take them off guard.